And I'll tell that to moms. I'm like, you know where you want to be, and
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, trust that. Lean
Yes.
into your instinct of what you're feeling, especially being pregnant. I'm like, I feel like your instincts are so strong if you let yourself feel it.
Welcome to the To Flourish podcast, where we sit down and have conversations around all things fertility, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. From trying to conceive to that little babe nestled in your arms, my hope is that you walk away from today's episode feeling empowered, confident, and encouraged to flourish in this season. Welcome back to the To Flourish podcast. I'm so excited to welcome you to today's episode. We are sitting down with somebody so dear and close to my heart, my friend Megan. Hi, Megan.
Hi.
This is really exciting because Megan and I, we've been friends since middle school, very long time. And yeah, she's just been such an integral part of my own journey in really so many aspects of life, but specifically within the birth world. And we are just going to dive right in. Megan, I would love if you would give a little introduction about who you are. I should add, Megan is also a midwife assistant. So she comes with knowledge being a mother as well as actually working in the birth world. And so I'd love to hear from you, just a little introduction and what drew you to the midwifery world.
Yeah. So I'm Megan. I'm married and I have 3 kiddos. My eldest is 4.5 and my youngest is 10 months old. And so that's my primary life right now. But as far as midwifery and all of that, back my earliest memories of midwifery, like the little seedling, was like, I think I was in second or third grade and strongly encouraging my friends to play birth with me and like thinking that was the funnest game in the world. And I thought I'd be like a baby doctor. That's all I knew. And then my sisters are 10 and 8 years older than me. So by the time I was in high school, my sisters were having babies and they were diving into the world of what are the options, what choices they have, what all that stuff. And so my sister actually introduced me to Ina May Gaskin, which if you haven't heard of her, I strongly recommend watching her documentary, reading her books. She's like the mother of modern midwifery. And I watched her documentary, The Farm, and just like immediately felt like my entire world opened up. I wanted to be a midwife.
Yeah.
Thought it was incredible. Saw the beauty of birth, the elegance of it, the rawness of it, which is never really seen in any other setting.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, it was more of like, okay, how do I become a midwife? And I grew up in the culture of you go to college, there's this clear track, and midwifery was not that way. So I didn't know. So I went to college, got a business degree, thought that would help me in some way with midwifery. And from there, got pregnant with our first little baby, and we had a miscarriage. And my sister suggested through grieving to get doula certified, and that would be healing for my heart. And it totally was. And actually, by the time the class started, I had found out I was pregnant with our firstborn. And so it was this really fun being pregnant for the first time, and then also learning how to support women, which I actually really loved being educated about birth through a third person experience, because they're not like trying to be careful of not making you scared. They're just like, oh, women make this sound when this is happening. And I loved that way of teaching. I loved not feeling like they're trying to filter things.
Yeah.
And they were laughing and talking about poop and, all these things. And it just felt normal. I didn't feel like someone was trying to be on stage for you.
Yeah.
So I did that.
That's so awesome.
And then I always knew I wanted to have a midwife. I saw my sisters have hospital births, home births, accidental home births, C-sections. So I had seen a gambit of what it looks like, and I knew in my heart I wanted a home birth. I was worried about money. And when I was praying, I felt like the Lord just really was like, Megan, do what you want now, like in the moment. Like, don't wait till you have money. Don't wait till XYZ. Like, choose what's best for you now and like honor that. And
Mhm.
so I did. I was like, okay, we're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
I want the birth that I want. I don't want to like fumble and try to do something that I think might be best financially or smarter. And so then we found that birth, and that midwife actually connected me deeper into the birth world after I had my son.
Mm.
Connected me with a really amazing senior midwife in our community that's taught a bunch of the midwives. Me and her clicked immediately and fell in love with each other. And
Mm.
like, I helped her develop some online stuff. And she brought me into a birth center that she was helping run. And from there, it just a ripple effect of what the Lord was doing in our life and just opening these doors that I could go to all these mamas' births. And
Yeah.
I don't keep perfect track, but it was like 250 plus births I was attending. And during that, I was pregnant with my daughter,
Aw.
all that stuff. And my son, my third. So yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of like
Yeah.
little tiny things that slowly rippled
Yeah.
into this world of birth.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how birth is. It kind of grabs you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so beautiful. How old were you when you watched the Ina May documentary?
I think I was in
Like
eighth grade or
eighth
maybe a
grade?
freshman.
It's so incredible.
Yeah.
Like feeling that draw at such a young age, and then even getting to see your sisters walk through like the threshold of becoming mothers and birth, and deciding what you wanted to experience.
Yeah.
That's so incredible.
It definitely gave me, I feel like, more time because I feel like most moms don't process it till they're pregnant.
Yeah.
And I've always felt really thankful that my sisters are so much older than me because there's so many things that they've walked, and I've had enough time to see the repercussions and the goods of it all.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Well, I would love, you touched on in your journey of becoming a midwife assistant that you also stepped into being a doula. For those who might not know the difference between what a midwife is and what a doula is, could you give a little context to that?
yeah, so that's a really common thing to not have a lot of clarity on. So it's like not a big deal. The biggest difference is a doula is a, I'm not like having the perfect definition, but it's basically you're hiring somebody who knows a lot about the birth world, who knows how to support you physically. If you're in the hospital setting, often they're known to be really good at advocating for your wishes and your desires for your birth, and knowing like the medical lingo and the laws of like how to defend what those things are. And then even from like the dad side, a doula is often someone that's just like knows birth and knows what's normal, and it just kind of calms the whole environment. It lets the dad feel like, okay, this is okay. Lets the mom feel like she can go in her own little world. Let the dad just be there to support her, and then the doula supports and facilitates an atmosphere of peace for that family as best as she can. She is not trained in medically at all. She's not supposed to give any medical advice. She can give you like information and books to research, but she's not like a medical professional. So that's like the clearest difference. It's more like a really good friend. Or like growing up, doulas, like generationally, doulas were just the people in your community that would come and support you and like be with you. The word gossip comes from doulas because your god siblings would come to profess to the Catholic Church that that baby did come out of you. And these women would get drunk and like hang out and gossip and talk about everybody, and that's how the word gossip. So it's like this long history of just women coming around and supporting each other, and it was normal. Midwifery is the medical side. So at the very fundamental, it's someone who's providing safety. I always feel like that with my midwife. I'm like, you're just here as like this angel of protection, of like, if we need something, you're here and you have the medical experience and the knowledge and the like nutrition and everything to help teach and guide us what's best for our kiddos. They are trained medical professionals. They're trained in resuscitation of infants. They know they have, in California at least, they can carry Pitocin for hemorrhaging. And like birth center versus home birth, it would be the same style of care
Yeah.
for licensed midwives. And that's something else too. There's a difference between different types of midwives and what their philosophies are. But
Mhm.
at its foundation, it's a medical professional who carries you through your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And
Okay.
most midwives, the rest of your life.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Who is somebody, or what kind of situation would you encourage, like, to have a doula, or to search out maybe having a doula as a part of someone's support
hmm
team?
So I've heard a variety of answers. A lot of midwives prefer the first baby for everyone to have a doula
Mhm.
because you don't necessarily know what to expect. It takes a lot of the load off the midwives if there's
Mm.
someone that's just a friend that's sitting with you and like reminding you of that piece and not letting any little contraction make you think like the baby's coming immediately.
Yeah.
Because we'll see those types of things where like the dad thinks the baby's gonna fall out at any moment. We're like, it's gonna be a while. So a lot of times those first mamas really benefit from having somebody with that wisdom that can come to your home like the second there's anything
Mhm.
and is like 24/7 just right there.
Yeah.
Midwives are there for you 24/7, but they have to prioritize rest and all those things so that they're there and like fully present for you when the baby comes. So
Mhm.
they're less likely to stay with you from like the very first contraction. They might wait till things are picking up and things are closer
Mhm.
and it's maybe like 8 hours till baby comes versus maybe 24, 48. Doulas would be there for you if you desired that.
Yeah.
The other reason is if for some reason, in my opinion, if you're having a hospital birth, I think you should have a doula. Like if I were to have a hospital birth for whatever reason, I would 100% get a doula.
Mhm.
And for the hospital setting, I care less about the emotional support and more of the protection. Like I want the doula to be there as an advocate for me to make sure that I
Mhm.
feel like I can go into my zone in birth and in labor and feel that trust with me and my baby to birth well and let her be in charge of making sure that the hospital is operating in a way that is best for me and my baby and
Mhm.
not have my husband trying to do that while
Yeah.
also being like I want my husband with me.
Yeah.
And so if I have her, I feel like okay, she's doing what she can. She's knowing what my heart is and she can help prompt me if there's something that the hospital might want to do that I don't want to
Mhm.
then speak up. Um so that's my reason. I love knowing the options
Yeah.
that maybe the doctors might not share with you.
Yeah.
And so that's a
Yeah.
big thing for me.
They're like being your advocate while you're in the hospital.
Yeah, or if something were to happen, to know that someone could stay with the baby and someone could stay with me. Like my husband wouldn't have to choose between me and the baby or that kind of stuff. Like it's just really nice to have that extra pair of hands who knows how it works and knows the role of everything.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the piece around the husband too, because I feel like in stories that I've heard of, births in the hospital, the husband, needing to kind of step up and be aware of, what the practitioners or the doctors are saying, and
hmm
not necessarily because they're managing that part, maybe not as present for what's going on with, their wife or their baby. And so having that extra support that frees up the husband, who naturally is a protector, right? Like,
hmm
and that's a part of protecting your wife, is wanting to step in between her and someone else, like a doctor or something, but also in birth, like the presence of your husband just being there with you, I feel like is protecting too. So the doula seems to be a role that, just frees up everyone in your family to just focus in on the birth.
And like with the hospital, a lot of times we are going the hospital track, there isn't much discussion in the prenatals leading up of what the
Mm-hmm.
options are, unless you bring them up. And even then, it might not be a ton of dialogue about it just because there's a rush for times for the doctors usually, or,
Yeah.
there's a variety of different reasons. But a doula, especially with your first little one, or if you've never had a hospital birth, can like lay out multiple questions. And so you meet with them leading up to your birth multiple times too. And you create like an in detail understanding of like what your options are, what's normal, what to expect, da
Mm-hmm.
da da da. So if the husband's never seen that, if it's just you and your husband and or like your mom or whoever's with you, that's a lot of really big decisions to make. And
Yeah.
if you don't feel like you're capable of making those decisions, I've seen where there's some resentment in the marriage or the
Mm.
relationship down the road of like, I said I wanted this, but in the moment when the doctors were pressuring you, you advocated and said this for me
Mhm.
instead. And
Mhm.
so instead of honoring the mom and like trying to defend that, I mean, it makes sense. Like there's so many things happening at once.
Yeah.
And the husband or the partner wants basically whatever's best for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but there might be a lack of clarity of what that actually is. So
Totally.
having those discussions ahead of time and even knowing what those discussions should look like is great with someone that's run around the ropes a couple times.
Yeah. They like know it. Yeah. Well, now that we've kind of talked about a little bit of a difference between a midwife and a doula, I would love to just start to explore and dive into for somebody who's decided that they want to have a home birth. And next step is I found out I'm pregnant. I want to have a home birth. How do I find a midwife? What does this process look like? Because it is not the normal way of going through birth, getting to do that. And so there might not be people around us who basically, right, the people who have gone before us
You
might
be the first.
be the first. And so as being the first, how do I find a midwife? What's the first step?
So even just you saying that, I want to say, even though midwives are for birth, they're also for like planning of getting pregnant. Like, so if I've even had friends that met with midwives before they got married just to have a conversation about women's health. They can do pap smears. They can
Wow.
teach you about like your cycle and how to track it to help getting pregnant. They can guide you towards natural family planning options. So there's so much more. Like, honestly, I feel like the term, like, they're just like these wise women. And there's even like midwives that are now diving into menopause and like that kind of season.
Wow.
So it's really finding like a good grandma friend who can guide you through it all, who's done it before you. And so even if you're not pregnant, you can totally meet with midwives and talk about nutrition. You can get blood work done, all that stuff with them. But let's say you're pregnant and you're trying to figure out even how to get along about it. You can usually look up like state licensed midwives websites, and there's like whole directories. When I was pregnant with my first, I literally just typed in the city we live in and midwife, and just a list came up. I know in certain areas it's a lot sparser, so you have to be considering hours of drive or like what you're comfortable with of how far away your midwife lives, which is disappointing sometimes. Like, I think we need to increase more and more how many midwives we have. There's also, so that's basically what I'd say. I would say get online or even on like Instagram. My midwife with my second, Clean, she has an Instagram, Natural Childbirth 101, and I know people message her all the time being like, I live in such and such state or city. Like, do you know anybody? So don't feel like scared to reach out to midwives you follow or stuff and just like feed off what other people are telling you. It's definitely a community.
Yeah.
And with that being said, there's things to think about. There's like distance, how far away. Usually there's an interview process where you talk with the midwife first and meet with them. And I highly recommend your spouse or whoever is going to attend your birth, like if it's your mother or whatever, come together and you guys ask all the questions. I remember literally Google searching like questions to ask a midwife and
did that too.
printing it out and using that as my guide of like, oh, that's a good question. Like, oh yeah, how many transfers do they have? Like, why did they transfer? Things that are those hard questions, like why are you a midwife? Those types of things are really good getting a sense of who they are. And I really believe that the midwife is interviewing the family as much as the family is interviewing the midwife, because if there's not a foundation over that relationship and a building of trust over the pregnancy,
Yeah.
then the birth won't go well. Like a birth is so emotional and there is like physical things, but if a mom doesn't feel safe and like she could trust her provider, then I don't think there is that release that a woman can have in the
Mhm.
same way that if she felt fully surrounded and taken care of. So personalities could be a reason not to go with someone or
Mhm.
to go with someone like, or I know for me, like I had to find the sweet spot of like what age
Mm.
of a woman, which is so futile. Like it doesn't really matter, but like I noticed that because my sisters are older than me, I was connecting more with women that were about my sister's age and that I would just naturally bond with them more. And
Mhm.
so there's things to consider about that too. Like if you had hard childhood wounds of like abuse from your mother or things to be considering that if your midwife is reminding you of those things
Yeah.
because I've seen it multiple times where a mom had child abuse backgrounds and then
Mm.
in the moment of that vulnerability of birth those things flaring up and a lack of
Mm.
trust and a lack of safety showing. So
Yeah.
and that's the beauty of midwifery is really open-handedly. Like there's so many midwives, but they're not competing against each other. Like
Mhm.
there's so many different opinions and desires. Like if you want um, a really heavily nutrition minded midwife, do you really love nutrition? Do you want someone that's like really comfort? My middle sister loves the emotional support and really thrives on the encouragement and the constant affirmations to
Mm.
like encourage her through her pregnancy and her birth. So she wants more of those lovey mama figures.
Mhm.
I personally am like I know what I'm doing and I want to do it the way I want to do it. And I want you to make sure my baby and I are safe. And so I like more of the like hands off, educate me, trust my body, but also a little bit of that mama will wipe my face or if she sees that something's off about me, she'll bring it up. So
Mhm.
there's so many different styles. But I would definitely look at transfer. Like my top questions I'd ask is how often, like, how many births have you missed?
Mm.
Sometimes midwives will kind of get jaded, I'll say, in a way of waiting to the last minute to come to these births. And
Mm.
so I kind of stray away from midwives that are not going early enough to these moms. And of course, there's going to be times where babies just come and
Mhm.
there will be missed births, but they're on the phone, they're talking to you. Like a good midwife is right there supporting you.
Yeah.
But there's ones that kind of create a pattern of waiting to the last minute to just be there when the baby's born. And I
Mhm.
think that a midwife should be there throughout the journey of helping your body prepare and watching for signs and supporting you through that
Yeah.
birth.
Yeah.
Another thing is the transfer rate. A really high transfer rate to me makes me think that they don't really trust birth, the
Mhm.
safety of it.
Real quick, what is a
A
transfer
transfer
rate?
is when you go to the hospital
Okay.
when you have a planned home birth.
Mhm.
Yes, of course, there's going to be moms that need a transfer. That's the beauty of modern medicine is that we get to have the option to transfer when something's wrong. Um, that there is this beauty in knowing that we have doctors surrounding us and that they're given this gift to make sure the babies and you are safe.
Mhm.
But there is people who are a little bit more trigger happy
Mhm.
to be like, okay, this is not, I don't feel comfortable doing things that are within the scope of midwifery to support that mom, whether that's maybe changing positions or trying to give the mom fluids if she's getting tired or whatever. So it kind of gives you a sense of the style of midwifery.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's the main things I would worry about. And then what are reasons that they would choose to transfer your care? Like talking about that. You want to know that, like, have they ever delivered a breech baby on an accident? Have they ever dealt with da 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 da? Like anything, those questions, ask the hard ones. I really think the dads usually are way more of that protector style, like you've said. Whenever I've had people interview me for the center I worked at and like I've given them tours, um, it's usually the dad that has all the medical questions. They want to see
Mhm.
your medical equipment and ask, be like, can I see your medical equipment? What
Mhm.
would you do if blah, blah, blah happened? Or, whatever. And get all those fears that are inside of you that might be about home birth out on the table and let her answer them. And if
Yeah.
you feel safe and comfortable with her answers and you feel like there's that trust, I think that's way better than holding on to these fears and trying to act like it's okay, but there's something in the back of your
Yeah.
mind, and that's how I
Yeah.
feel. I'm like, you should feel 100% safe.
Yeah.
Like, you should feel like you are in the best possible hands.
Mhm.
And that there shouldn't be any of those questions, especially within that deep of a relationship where this baby is created out of your love
Mm.
and that safety. And I think the baby can sense if there's that sense of safety
Yeah.
in the room.
Yeah.
And the midwife too. Like, you all want to be on the same page. You want that trust to be there.
Mhm. I feel like those are all such good insight about what to have in our mind, or even just what you said, like take all of the fears around, okay, what am I afraid of happening? Or, because if it's your first birth or even your first home birth, if you've had a couple births or you've birthed before, it's a totally new, different experience. And so letting those fears come to the surface and like laying it all on the table, like you said, before the midwife. You mentioned there was one more thing you wanted to
There's so
say.
many more. Like, even as you're talking, I'm like, and this, and this, and this. Another thing I would definitely put as a priority of talking to your midwife about is, one, what's the game plan if they can't attend your birth? Like, because life happens.
Mhm.
Midwives try to be superheroes and never miss anything. But, like, let's say you get really, really sick or something happens.
Yeah.
Like, who's their backup midwife,
Mhm.
or what that process would look like, because with birth, like, the more consistent and stable, like, the safer the mom will feel, and they're just so emotionally sensitive to their environment that, like, that kind of shift could be a big thing.
Mhm.
um so just having that open communication of like, hey, what's the process, what would that look like? um and then and then also how many clients they're taking a
Mhm.
month. um And that's a really good sense of what kind of care, as far as like the one-on-one
Mhm.
style. I would say everybody's one-on-one necessarily, but if you are taking, and I guess my rule of thumb is if it's like a single midwife, if she's taking more than 4 a month, that's like a lot. That's a ton for a midwife to be
Okay.
doing. So like 6 would be insane to me. And so that would be one, like, that increases the chances of a midwife not being able to come to your birth,
Mhm.
because birth happens when birth happens, and there
Mhm.
might be 2 at the same time.
Yeah.
It increases, like, the less clients they're taking, the more personal, like, they can stop by more often.
Mhm.
The closeness, that's a big deal too. If a midwife lives down the street, it's no big deal to check in on your labor, or
Yeah.
like bring you another bag of tea
Yeah.
that you need, whatever. But if they're like 30 minutes, hour away, you start feeling kind of guilty. You're like, I don't want to make her come,
Mhm.
So, like,
Mhm.
personally, like, my attitude shifts and wanting to like people please for the midwife. And
Yeah.
so those things will show up in your heart. Um and if she has like 5 or 6 moms or all these questions, like, no matter how amazing she is, that is a bit of a distraction.
Mhm.
There's not that depth of intimacy. So I always go for midwives that have smaller client bases, because I
Mhm.
feel like I love that. I love the closeness. I love feeling like I'm the really good friend. I love
Yeah.
getting to know their kids, that kind of style. But the bigger client bases, I mean, that's a lot more experience. Usually they're very professional. So I'm not saying it's like like definitely no, but I would
Mhm.
just want, the more clients they have, the more I'd want to be like, so what do you do for self-care? Like, how are you upkeeping your life? Because that's very crazy
Yeah.
to have a lot of clients. But again, if they have like a 2 midwifery practice where they're tag teaming, my sister
Mhm.
had a group of midwives. It was 5
Oh,
midwives that
wow.
all work together, and so they'd rotate. And my sister, you fall in love with all of them, and it's this
Mhm.
huge team. So there's totally different styles. But if it's like a solo midwife, um, that's quite a bit of a
Mhm.
load for her.
Yeah.
So just to have it be a discussion question, just to know the style of care you're gonna get.
Yeah, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
I in my own like journey with my pregnancy and birth and midwife, the midwife we ended up going with, she was less than 5 minutes away and
Mm-hmm.
from where we lived. And it was funny in our interview when we were chatting and she shared that She said something along the lines of like, "I'll be like your neighborhood midwife. I could just ride my bicycle over, and it'll be like the old days." And it was just
Mhm.
this super endearing and like, ah, yes, like you're so close. And then for us too, it was our first birth and first home birth, and I know that was uh just gave a lot of peace to my husband as well, knowing how close she was. And like you mentioned, like she was so able to drop by like all the time. Like even it felt like just out of enjoyment of relationship, not necessarily because like we needed something to get done, but she
Mhm.
just became such a part of our family. And like the drop-ins were so exciting and lovely. And it was a great part of the experience for me. But also, I love what you said, right? Everybody's so different. And so, really like sitting down and figuring out what's important to you and your family and the things that are non-negotiables and presenting those to whoever you're interviewing to find a good fit, because someone might want a more professional,
Yeah,
like,
totally.
I
That's
want to
really
see
common.
you in this rhythmic schedule, and that's
Mhm.
pretty much it. Like, um, and so really taking the time to get to know the midwife and let the midwife get to know you.
One of my friends that's gone to a lot of births, just like a friend, we were talking about midwifery, and she was asking me about multiple different midwives in our community, and I was just kind of sharing about each one and their character and how they operate. And she was like, like, to be a midwife, like you kind of have to be weird. And like that's like it's a crazy job. Like your whole life revolves around being on call and like having to drop out a hat and stuff too. So like that's the beauty of midwifery. There is more professional. Like our first midwife was she reminded us of a librarian, like very like calm and quiet and very educational and
Hmm.
still. And then there's midwives that are like very hippie and like all this stuff. And there's like all of our preconceived ideas of what a midwife should be and like
Hmm.
all that. And there's so many different types. There's so many, even like what they're advocating for and their style of care is
Yeah.
so different
Yeah.
because they're each different people. Even within like the birth center where they all are operating together as one team, each midwife like that I would assist had a different style, had different things that they would get more nervous about, had different
Hmm.
things of like how they would comfort moms
Yeah.
or their viewpoint of like being in the room versus giving them space. And
Hmm.
so yeah, it's a world.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I would love to ask you. So I know this because we are friends, and I've
Mhm.
walked with you through all of your pregnancies and births. And but you mentioned your first midwife, so you've had a couple midwives, different
Mhm.
midwives, right?
Yeah.
What went in to the decision to your midwives, like
Yeah.
having a different one for each birth?
Yeah, so I think like the biggest overarching theme I feel like is I grew as a person and like in that growth, the desires of what I wanted in my midwife shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And also their practices shifted as far as like my first midwife, she was like it was her first year, but her mom was a midwife too.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this generational warmth you felt. You felt this depth of wisdom that came from her
Yeah.
and just the support she had of these generational women. Um, and I loved it. I loved how secure I felt with my first baby. I wanted to feel like she was going to hold my hand
Mm.
and explain things I had never even heard about and,
Yeah.
be very detailed. She would come to our house, which is amazing when a midwife comes to your house for prenatal. Not
Yes.
a lot of midwives do it, which is totally understandable. It's a lot of driving for them, but I loved it. But regularly, I felt like I would have to kick her out of the house. Like she would be there for like 2 hours
Yeah.
just chatting, which we love, but I also was like, okay. And I remember going to one prenatal hospital just to get blood work and stuff done. And it was like, just a little bit of a fiasco, but I was like, it was like maybe 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
I was like shell shocked because I was used to these crazy long visits.
Mm-hmm.
And I look forward to them. It was so beautiful. And so I loved her for that first. And then with my second, because she had been in midwifery longer, she was more pricey. So that was part of it,
Mhm.
was just the price point. And then also she had partnered with another midwife, and I had, like, worked with both of them from, like, the assistant side, and so
Yeah.
I got to know them from, like, that role too, and I just didn't feel as vulnerable and comfortable in that space that I thought I would be,
Mhm.
which is totally fine. Like, when you bridge the gap of client to, like, employee kind of
Yeah.
relationship, it shifts.
Totally.
And during that time too, that's when I got really close to that senior midwife who brought me into the birth center and really trained me. So because I was working so intimately with her
Mhm.
already,
Mhm.
um, and she's like the midwife that trained all the other midwives, I was like, well, obviously, like I would love to see what it's like to be like taken care of by you. And so with my daughter, I had this midwife that had been to, I think it was 1,000+ births,
Wow.
um, doing all this. And so we would like go to her house, and she's this grandma, just so sweet. And we'd sit in her backyard, and my son would like play around in the creek, and she would like play like palpate my stomach, which means like feeling where the baby is, and talk to the baby. And she just had such a way
Mm.
about her.
Yeah.
Um, and very loving, very sweet, and intimate. And um she was like retired though.
Okay.
So she was doing it for me, and she did offer to do it with my son, to my youngest.
Mm.
But in my spirit I felt a very strong no. And it turns out later it's because one of her other clients that she had been to all 5 of the births was due like the exact same time, and she flew
Oh,
to that
wow.
mom
Mhm.
to be with her, and, like, was there for a very long time. So it was
Yeah.
definitely the Lord being like, "No, like, there's something else I have in store for this
Yeah.
midwife," and
Yeah.
total peace about it.
Ah,
So
yeah.
it was totally like, 'cause at first I was like, "Why is this a no?" Like, she was incredible. She's such a
Mhm.
gift.
Mhm.
And I've been to births with her and know how capable she is. I'm like, if anything goes wrong, that woman
Yeah.
knows what she's doing. Like, I feel safer with her than in a hospital, hands
Mm.
down, anything. And so there was that piece of letting go of that. And during also, because I'm working with midwives, I got really close to this other midwife who's closer to my sister's age. And that's the first time I felt like I had a really healthy bond with a midwife, where I felt like, one, it's my third. I felt this growth in myself where I could stand up and speak for myself. Where before I
Mm.
kind of felt this desire to please the midwives and wanting to do what they want me to do,
Mhm.
wanting to make sure that I was like the golden child kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then with the third, I finally felt like I was like, no, what do I want? What do I desire? I
Oh.
want more of that like feminist backbone. Like, I'm making my choices and I'm standing for them. And
Mhm.
I want you to like defend and protect me in that. And I felt like this midwife was that. Like, she like knew when to address my heart, and I felt like she could
Mm.
see my emotions, but at the same time she'd just be like, "Okay, that's your choice. Like, this is the pros and cons. This is what I'm worried about. This is what I'm not worried about." And just like there. And then I would sit there and be like, "Okay, Megan, like, pull up your big girl panties and like make your own choice for your own children, and
Yeah.
like be an adult."
Mhm.
And I was like, it was so good for me. And I felt like that just carried me into my birth, where I felt like I was trusting in myself and in my little one.
Mhm.
And like, if she were asking something of me, I felt like I could say yes or no. I didn't feel like I just had to do what she was asking me to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And going to so many births, you see such a variety, and how often the moms, because it's such a vulnerable setting, will just do
Mhm.
whatever the midwife or the hospital is asking her to do because she wants to keep her baby safe. And
Yeah.
oftentimes in our heads, that's what we're thinking. We're like, if like they need me to do that, then like that's what I need to do, whether or
Mhm.
not in my gut I feel like that's actually what I should be doing.
Yeah.
So I was really thankful to have a support system that did trust me
Mhm.
to do what I needed to do. And it
Yeah.
was my third. So usually after your first baby, midwives are a little bit more trusting that you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That you've been through it before
Yeah.
and no,
Yeah. You
have an
know
idea of
what,
what to expect.
you know how your body works and what
Yeah.
to expect for yourself.
Yeah. One thing I want to talk about is, so we've kind of talked about a situation of I find out I'm pregnant, I know I want to do a home birth, and I go searching for a midwife. What if for someone who decides they want to do a home birth, deep into their pregnancy, is it ever
Oh.
too late
Mhm.
to switch or to find a midwife?
Mhm. Um, there's a couple things that pop into my mind. If you're, like, due, so if you're, like,
Mhm.
37 weeks
Mhm.
and farther, you probably have some midwives turn you away
Okay.
just because it's so close,
Mhm.
and from their opinion, when there's, like, legal issues, like, sometimes hospitals get really, like, grumpy when you, quote, unquote, "take" a client from them,
Mm.
there's, like, a possessiveness, and there's only so much time to build that relationship, so there's,
Mhm.
like, certain things that midwives get a little bit nervous about because midwifery is so built on trust,
Mhm.
and, like, if you start right away in your pregnancy, there's this whole season of, like, growing you in nutrition for your baby and
Yeah.
growing you and taking care of your body with chiropractic work and massage and making sure baby's in the best position. So there's all this time as this gentle process. So when someone comes when they're, like, 37, 38 weeks, or they're,
Mhm.
like, already about to have their baby,
Yeah.
like, they're getting rid of all these safety nets that they normally build for their moms
Mhm.
of all this stuff to provide to make the most optimal situation possible.
Yeah.
That being said, I have seen moms transfer care at 37 weeks.
Mhm.
I have seen moms jump ship and, like, do amazing. Like, they knew it. And sometimes there's so many different facets of why we wait. I think
Mhm.
internally we know what we want.
Yeah.
And then I always talk to moms. Sometimes it's truly like they're doing the best they can, but if you really want a home birth or you don't feel comfortable in your hospital setting, even if you don't feel comfortable with your specific OB,
Mhm.
fire them. Like, you need to feel safe.
Mhm.
And they might act out, they might get angry at you. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Like, it has nothing to do with you. You need to do what's best for your family. And I always feel like that's such a good beginning ground for parenting.
Mhm.
Like, are you gonna let everybody else make choices for you? Are you gonna be worried about some authority figure telling you something even though in your gut you don't feel like that's best?
Mhm.
Like, that's gonna carry in years and years and years down the road. Or, like, are you
Yeah.
doing it because your parents are telling you you shouldn't have a home birth?
Mhm.
Or even your partner saying, like, I've heard moms tell me, like, "Oh, my husband would never support me." One, because, like, they don't feel safe, they think it's a bad idea, or that you can't handle the pain,
Yeah.
like, all these different things, and I'm like, "Okay, well, that's a beautiful ground while you're pregnant to have those conversations, maybe to
Mhm.
get counseling, to come to a conclusion out of peace." One, how to stand up for yourself and your baby, how to, like, create a better balance of a relationship between you and your partner as best as possible.
Yeah.
I say partner too because I'm used to the birth world where everything is partner, but, like, your husband and your spouse,
Yeah.
and because usually really the mom's wishes need to be honored because she's gonna look back, and if something goes wrong, if
Mhm.
something's different and she in her gut knew she wanted something else, gonna eat at her.
Yeah.
Like, if something like, it's one thing for her to be on the same page and making these choices. It's another thing to feel like people are making choices for you. So that's my
Mhm.
first thing is if
Yeah.
you're in the hospital setting and you're wondering, should you have a home birth? What's going on in your heart? All these things. And you want that, but you feel like you're being pushed down or you feel like you don't have a voice, even though you really do.
Yeah.
I would say use your voice in a kind way and like a wanting to learn way, bringing those people to talk to the midwife. Like, I always advise them, like, if your mom is like super anti midwife, freaking out,
Mhm.
have her come meet the midwife. Like, what's
Yeah.
the worst thing?
Yeah.
Like, have there be clarity. A lot of times it's just a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge. People don't know what freestanding birth centers are, and they're like shocked when they come. They're like, this is gorgeous. There's
Yeah.
so many things. And there's middle grounds. Like, let's say your husband doesn't want a home birth. There's birth centers, not the hospital attached birth centers, quote
Mhm.
unquote. Those are
Mm.
not freestanding birth centers. There's
Yeah.
all these different things that are basically a home birth, but you're just paying to birth somewhere else.
Yeah.
But that makes them feel safer because being in your home for some reason doesn't feel safe. So there's that. Um, there and besides that, like, there's no big deal in like shifting. Like, just start reaching out to midwives, start talking to them, even while you're still, like, people do congruent care where they're being seen by the hospital and a midwife, and
Yeah.
that's like where they feel safe. Um, And so you can kind of choose and play around with how you want that to go.
Mm.
But most midwives are totally fine with taking you late into care.
Mhm.
And like working alongside you. Their concerns are more, are you low risk? Like, are you safe for a home birth? But that's things that they would filter with you
Yeah.
before you ever, became part of their care.
Mhm.
But I would, and then my other thing that I just feel really strongly about is a lot of times it's a money issue.
Mhm.
Um, so one little shout out for like the Christian kosher insurances cover home births and birth center births. And it's like a really incredible insurance company that does a really good job.
Mhm.
They cover like 40 plus chiropractic visits, like
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. So if that might be an option for you to look at is like looking at your insurance even before you're pregnant and
Mhm.
deciding what's best for your family.
Yeah.
And two, there's so many midwives that will work with finances.
Mhm.
They're used to
Yeah.
it. Like they can figure out a budget plan. They can figure out trades sometimes. If you have a trade and you can offer like do part money, part trade, there's
Mhm.
so many ways that please, please, please don't let finances be the reason to not choose your birth. I had a friend who was debating between getting a new car and doing the home birth that they wanted. And they chose that they said that they felt like the car was a better choice. And
Mm.
their hospital birth was very intense
Mhm.
and very challenging and traumatizing for them and a
Yeah.
lot for them to work through. And to me, I'm like, well, this car, like that was just even a down payment, it wasn't the car. Like, and
Mhm.
cars get crashed and we don't remember our cars. We might think about it fondly, but your birth is, in my opinion,
Totally.
far more memorable than my wedding. And that's
Yeah.
another thing we'll talk about too. I'm like, how much money did you spend on your wedding?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I remember my birth more than my wedding.
Uh-huh.
Like, and I know that my birth more heavily impacted my relationship with my husband and my children, how I view mothering. And I've seen it over and over and over again,
Mhm.
teaching moms that they don't have a voice, that their bodies are broken if it
Yeah.
goes bad, or not bad, but like if they goes in a way that they didn't want to go and they didn't feel like they're in control. And now there's like this trauma.
Yeah.
Or if these moms like persevered and went through the hard and went through the good and like stood up, like how that shaped their parenting to be
Mhm.
confident and to trusting their instincts, to trusting their body, to being
So
proud
good.
of the woman that God designed them to be and proud of their husband. Like it makes you feel more attractive
Mhm.
when you like can push through. And even if it ends up to be a C-section or whatever, like your choice and guiding that path, feeling like an active part of that
Mhm.
conversation is what's the important. It's not what your birth turned into. It's not like did X, Y, and Z happen. It's did I feel like I was an active role? Did
Yeah.
I speak up and decide what was best? So if you feel that shift in your heart of, hey, I'm worried about XYZ, but I know that I want to be at home birth.
Mhm.
I know that that's the kind of style I want a midwife that's going to like mother me and walk alongside me or teach me about nutrition and all those other holistic options.
Yeah.
Like that's at least the journey I want to walk along.
Mhm.
Whether or not it turns into this perfect home birth or it turns into this perfect hospital birth, like I know that this is the steps I want to take.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would look at how much money you spent on your wedding and
Yeah.
reconsider.
Yeah, that is such a good point. It's such a
Yeah.
good point because it just speaks to value. It's like
Mhm.
what which I feel like pregnancy and birth honestly should be a time of like confronting things within you, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like if you're lucky enough to kind of think about it and have these things come up before you're pregnant, like that's so good. Like
Mhm.
getting to prepare and intentionally think through things. But when you but I feel like, most often, right, we step into making these decisions once we find out we're pregnant.
Mhm.
But really embracing like confronting the values that I have or even identifying the values that I have. And that is such a good, I just love that point. It's like, yeah, we do spend so much money on so many things.
Mhm.
And thinking about like birth, like, and how you're birthing your child into the world and like you're being birthed as a mother and really like it should be something that is elevated high into one of the experiences of life. And so I love that you said that and brought that up.
Yeah. And it sets you up. I think in women in general, we are used to often putting ourselves last,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the mothering role, like finance and stuff are like, oh, it makes sense to buy the kids clothes, or it makes sense
Yes.
to do XYZ for everybody else. And then we're left with, being burned out. And that's like a really
Mm-hmm.
common pattern,
Yeah.
but we need to be fed and well taken care of. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that these kinds of steps set up a foundation of us learning how to value ourselves while
Yeah.
being a mom and
Yes.
teaching our spouses and having those conversations of what it looks like to take care of each other and to have
Mm-hmm.
this value set up ahead of time so you can heal faster, so you can move forward, that there isn't all this other stuff and
Yeah.
baggage
Yeah.
you're then bringing in. And that's not to say like hospital birth automatically assumes that there's trauma and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Like there can be really healthy things too, but that's honoring getting a quality doula,
Mm-hmm.
having postpartum support, maybe taking an extra step to take classes outside of the hospital to teach yourself nutrition. So it
Yeah.
looks many different ways, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know if you're going to save money being in the hospital,
Versus.
going to find these other resources if
Mm-hmm.
you don't feel like that's the place you actually want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I do feel like sometimes in our gut, there's moms that are like, yeah, I meant to be in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And then their birth showed that. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was things that arose and it was so good that they were there. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I think deep down, and I'll tell that to moms, I'm like, you know where you want to be, and
Yeah.
that's fine. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like trust that. Lean
Yes.
into your instinct of what you're feeling, especially being pregnant. I'm like, I feel like your instincts are so strong if you let yourself feel it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my favorite thing. It's teaching moms to actually trust themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important. So good. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to touch on or share?
The other thing I keep feeling is like just that birth can be really simple. Like raising kids can be very simple. And I think our world tries to overcomplicate it and make
Mm-hmm.
it really expensive and add all these extra things, like the fancy cribs and the fancy walkers and the sound machines and all that. And it can feel very overwhelming and very
Yeah.
expensive. But really the best things you can do is sew into things that like bodywork, your midwife, your nutrition, counseling,
Mm-hmm.
all those things that like are the deep inner works that are actually much harder than just buying the fancy things.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are going to absolutely shape your family
Yeah.
and create a foundation to heal and grow on. So I would just look at your baby registry, maybe instead do funds towards your midwife or whatever it is, those finances that you look at, and maybe just consider allocating things differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being bold enough to tell people that you might not want to hear their birth stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Choosing to fill your heart and your mind with what's important and
Yeah.
what's of value to you, and not just letting the world tell you what you should do and how you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot simpler. Just keep saying that to yourself. It's a lot simpler.
It's a lot simpler than it's
Than
made
we
out
like
to
to
be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we've talked about doing another episode about your birth stories, but I just love everything that you have to share around like the inner work of birth. I feel like if you ever wanted to do an episode about that, I would love, love, love to have a conversation.
The heart and minds of women.
Yes. And how it shows up.
Yeah.
But yeah, this I think concludes our episode for the day.
Thank you for having me.
Megan, thank you for coming and for sharing so much gold. And I feel like such a good place to start if you're even contemplating wanting to do a home birth or wondering if the conventional way is for you. And so I would encourage you, like Megan shared, look into questions, look into the midwives in your area, like evaluate the values that you have. But Megan, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast.